Hey YouTube friends, Dustin Bellinger here, and doing a response for Psyched on baseball cards. I want to congratulate Tony on the milestone. I remember when I first started watching Tony's channel, and I'm positive, he had fewer subscribers than I did at that point, and he's deservedly gone past me, and I'm sure it's going to continue to grow. And he wanted us to show some cards that, weren't in our display and maybe we hadn't shown before, or maybe we'd even forgot about. And I'm not one that forgets about the stuff I have. So I just thought, well, I'd pick out some guys that I don't think I've ever shown before, and some cards that I suppose are kind of the players I think we might have forget about some of the seasons they had. This first one here, it is Miguel Tejada. This is from, what year is this one? 2002. And I can't remember if this is the year he was American League MVP, or if this was like the year he was like an all-star game MVP. But I know he had both of those in his career. And it's, it's kind of easy to forget, that there was a time when he was one of the premier shortstops in the American League and in baseball. He had great power. And this one right here, Steve Stone, 1980 tops, and this is the year he was the American League Cy Young winner. Now, I grew up listening to Steve Stone with Harry Carey on WGN, doing the Cubs games. And you realize Steve's a professional pitcher as a kid, or former professional pitcher as a kid. But, if you listen to him tell it, he kind of describes it almost as if, the only time he ever happened to get anybody out was by pure luck, or if somehow the wind was screaming in at Wrigley and he was able to get some guys to fly out to the warning track, because the wind held it in the park. But, he did actually have a rather spectacular season there in 1980. And he kind of sacrificed his arm that year. He really worked it hard, especially with his breaking pitches that year, really going to the well because that pitch was doing well for him. And, really taxed his arm, just for the good of his, what was his best season, and for, a team that was doing really well that year as well. And it was just a situation where he said, I'm gonna get the most I can out of this thing this year, and I'm gonna worry about everything after that later on. And he probably paid for it, with the end of his career, but who knows, he might have gotten a little bit of money after that 1980 season that ended up making up for it, from a financial standpoint. Even if he lost some years of playing time, he might have gotten a little extra money for what years he had left. This here is Maury Wills. It's a guy that kind of a borderline Hall of Famer. He was, a stolen bases specialist, and definitely a guy that was a bit of a hard guy to get along with. He was not well liked really by teammates or the press, really anybody for the most part. He just could be a bit prickly, but he was a National League MVP in the early 1960s. And, You know, the 1992 Toronto Blue Jays that won the World Series, that team was loaded with stars and Hall of Famers on that team. But does anybody remember who won the World Series MVP that season? Go ahead and try and take a guess. If you said Pat Borders, I'm guessing you cheated. But he really had a great World Series. And, you know, it's ended up he was the MVP. I mean, you just couldn't get him out there during a few game stretch there. And, you know, it's just kind of surprising with all the star power that team had that's the guy that would win an MVP, you know, World Series MVP on the biggest stage. And here's another guy that's kind of, you know, has a resume that's worthy of consideration for the Hall, but he's not probably a guy that really makes the cut. You know, but he did have an American League Cy Young winning season here in 1967. And this one here, 1962, this is Leon Wagner. Leon was kind of your typical, you know, all or nothing power guy. He wasn't a great average hitter, but he could hit the ball with some power. And played on some teams that weren't too good early on in his career. In 1962, there with the Angels, he ended up making an all-star game and had a couple hits and was an MVP of the all-star game that year. This guy right here, he was an American League MVP twice. And when you get to thinking about that, to be the best player in a league for multiple years, and then, you know, the fact that you're not able to sustain that is kind of surprising, because I tell you what, in like 2000, if you'd said, hey, is this guy a likely Hall of Famer? I think just about everybody that was following baseball closely would have told you yes, absolutely. And really, he didn't end up all that close. I mean, things just got off the rails from an injury and a production standpoint, and then you've got, you know, that team's got a lot of PED taint to it. So none of it's tied directly to him, but there's a whole lot of smoke in his general direction. So that certainly doesn't help him at all. Here's another cool one with some shine. Joe Mauer. And here's another guy. It's like, you know, he had a decent stretch there for 4 years or so, where just about everybody would have said he's the very best catcher in baseball. And, you know, was American League MVP at least once. And it's just kind of surprising sometimes. Although, at catcher, it doesn't surprise me as much, because I mean, catcher just sucks the life out of people, and the number of guys that can be tremendously productive at that position for an extended amount of time, it's just an incredibly short list. Even, you know, some of the greats of the game, like Bench and Yogi Berra, and that they had their greatest seasons from an offensive production wise very early in their careers. And, you know, as their careers went on, that offensive production, you know, did diminish, to a pretty significant degree. Even though they were still good offensive players, they weren't nearly as successful as they went along there. And here's another guy, kind of a journeyman pitcher throughout most of his career, but he did have one outstanding season here in 1974 and became National League Cy Young winner that season. And here I've got Mo Vaughn, who another guy that had a brief portion of his career that was extremely productive. Look at his numbers there, 93, 94. They had, great offensive numbers all through those years, 25 plus home runs, over 100 RBIs in 93, and his 95 season was probably the best of his career. And so, but once again, it was kind of after you hit that pinnacle where they reach one of the best players in the league, and yet it can fall apart so quickly. And, he's a guy that, I don't know, outside of Boston fans, I mean, even if you were following the game in that point, is Mo Vaughn a guy that, you think of and remember as a guy that was a fearsome hitter throughout the early and mid-90s? Probably not, but, he really was for a couple of years. I didn't even bring in and get an Albert Bell, but he's another guy that was just, a guy that pitchers would definitely be afraid to face, and if you were playing against his team, it was the worst thing you wanted to see was Albert Bell coming up to the plate in a big spot where he could do some damage and hurt you. So there it is. That's 10 cards. So thanks for letting me ramble and talk here for a few minutes. Congratulations again, Tony, and I'll talk to everybody again next time. So long.